Welcome to the Decentralized podcast, where we break down the world of Web3, digital assets, and DAOs with me, your host, Petri Basson. In this episode of the Decentralized podcast, we're having a conversation with Farooq Malik. Farooq is the co-founder of Rian, an innovative solution that allows users to spend their crypto using credit cards. In this episode, we cover startups, going through an accelerator, how Rian was initially set up, and we also get into some of the really interesting use cases for Rian cards. I really hope you enjoy this episode.
Farooq, thank you very much for joining us for the Hash podcast. I'm really looking forward to having a chat with you, learning a little bit about your background, learning about what Rian does. I was looking at your background and sort of how you got to this point. I have to say, really interesting road that you've walked getting to here. So, qualifications in economics and humanities from University of Austin. Then you went into globalization and development at University of London. So very interesting qualifications, but you started your career sort of going into working with Accenture, Lehman Brothers, and then Booz Allen Hamilton, which is far removed from a startup almost.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming that you learned a lot working with those companies. What would you say working with the Accentures, all those kinds of companies? What were the takeaways? What did you learn there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be down here. But I guess with Accenture, one of the core things that I think I didn't quite appreciate at the time was how important it is to be able to just be patient and allow things to happen. And a lot of times when you're younger, early stages in your career, it can be quite frustrating to be working at a large company because there's very limited ways to make an impact. There's a lot of dependencies on third parties, and you kind of come in and you're like, I'm the smartest person ever, and you're trying to make a lot of things happen. And I think it was important to be humbled by the fact that it's a massive corporation. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of dependencies, there's a lot of qualified people that are able to do things, and sometimes a lot of the work that you do will never be used. And I think that maybe that's one of the key things I learned, which was, it's okay if you do a bunch of work, and it's okay if that doesn't end up being used because things have changed, or the client's needs have changed, or the world has moved on. And I think that was an important lesson for me to learn early on, because it helps you build perseverance, I think, longer term. And I definitely appreciate it today, looking back on it.
Oh, definitely. I think what's interesting is, I get people who ask me for advice. Should I go and work for a big company? I went through Big Four audit and all those kinds of things before I start my startup or do something like that. Do you think there's value in almost seeing how the big old slow machine does it before you?
I think it's enormously valuable, right? It's especially if you ever aspire to start a company or do something or work in sales or build anything that needs third parties to buy it. It's important to understand how decisions are made at large corporations, because a lot of times you'll realize when somebody's really excited about what you're doing at a large company, you'll realize, oh, this actually doesn't mean anything, or hey, if the right person is interested in it, then yes, it does mean something. But you really need that experience of having worked in a large company to understand, oh, like this person's function is over here, like they're really far away from anywhere purchasing decisions are made. And so it doesn't matter how excited they get, like they can't really buy my thing. And that's actually like helped me validate ideas even now, right? Like building things and building solutions and working at startups. You learn a lot about, okay, well, this is a false sense of signal, and this is like actual, meaningful signal that I can make a decision out of or base a decision on. So you definitely appreciate those things a little bit more, especially if you're like understanding them and figuring them out while you're there. Admittedly, I don't think that I had the mental clarity when I was doing these jobs to be like, oh, let me figure out how buying decisions are made or how selling decisions are made. A lot of times they don't let younger people, early stage career folks do that kind of stuff. So I didn't really appreciate it. But now I'm like putting two and two together. I'm like, oh, actually, like a lot of times we would just say, oh yeah, this is interesting, but really I had no intention of buying it or using it. And if you were willing to give it to me for free, I would gladly waste your time. But ultimately, maybe at some point I would make the decision to do it, but it wasn't going to be on the time frame that the seller or the service provider wanted me to make that decision.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, especially as you say, when you're younger, you don't realize the value. You're sort of grinding, you're trying to do everything, but then later in your career, you can look back at things and you're like, okay, now I see it. This is like this, etc. As you were speaking, I mean, it's interesting for me to see the parallels between big traditional companies and what we're seeing in the DAO space these days in terms of navigating, how do you get funding, navigating, hierarchies, how everything works. What do you think the DAO space, etc., can sort of learn from traditional finance almost based on working for some of these big companies?
I think, some of it is just process and just procedures, right? Like a lot of times, especially at early stage companies, especially in like decentralized groups or people, globally working together on like an open source project, it can feel like the community is building bureaucracy into it. But I don't think that you necessarily need to build bureaucracy. It's important to build a process by which to assess a good idea or decide on a direction or work on something. I think that there's examples today in like decentralized protocols that are probably taking it to the extreme, right? But certainly some level of, control and deliberation is important so that you don't just make decisions based on the mood immediately right now in the community, right? And I think a lot of times that sense is not quite there yet. Although there are examples of, great communities that have developed a lot of really interesting structures that have checks and balances and are working towards, propagating that ecosystem further. But those, I think, are the exception, not the rule. And I think that more people should be able to get to the point where they can have a productive conversation with, effectively people who are their coworkers, right? And they're also their co-owners and their co-contributors, and working together on how do we maximize this thing we're working on, which is harder to do when there's a bear market, to be honest, because a lot of people are focused on, hey, how can I make my stake worth the most amount of money so that I can get out of here and leave it with you. So there's a lot of push and pull, right? So, but I think it's good to see communities emerging that are resilient and growing. There's good examples of tools that are emerging, which are helping people set up structures and provide more control to individual community subgroups. So I think we're on the right track on a lot of these things.
I think that's what's exciting is it's an old problem. We're solving it in new ways.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we're spinning our wheels. There are things that have almost been done before, systems that have been designed.
Absolutely.
But it's exciting to see some of these new collaboration tools because I almost think about it as the next iteration of working together.
Yeah.
We created the company, and that's pretty centralized, etc. This is the new way to work together, where it isn't as centralized and controlled by a few people.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's in many ways it's a similar model to cooperatives, right? But cooperatives have, kind of had their phases throughout history as well. Like there was lots of cooperatives and guilds, and then there was less. And there's still very successful cooperatives around the world today that manage or earn billions of dollars a year, and they're doing great. But it took it took work to get to the point where they can operate a business actually like a real business without having to worry about all of the coordination problems that come with equal ownership or, decentralization.
Yeah. No, it's that the decision making, I think, is one of the challenges we're seeing at the moment. Not everything has to be a vote. Sometimes you have to centralize a little bit, have someone that steers it and gets things done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think people would probably benefit from having subcommittees and then having that roll up into kind of more of a representative council and then having that roll up into something that is more actionable, right? But ultimately, this is all very new. So it's going to take time, and it's going to, some of it is going to work and some of it's not going to work. So it's just a natural state of things.
Yeah, no, it's a fun experiment to be part of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every day, no day is boring. There's always new things, new challenges, and it's very cool to see. We'll get back to the crypto side, the DAO side of things in a little bit. One other thing I wanted to ask you about is I saw you went to Lehman, but you did Lehman in London. So you sort of went from the US, grew up in the US, and then went to London. Yeah. How was that experience? Because you just sort of spoke about it's very international communities we're working with, etc.
Yeah.
How was it sort of moving to London, working there?
Yeah, so honestly, so I went to London to do my master's degree, and while I was there, I started interning at the bank, and so it was a really interesting experience for me because I'm just, I'd lived my whole life in the U.S., and so it was interesting to be exposed to a similar but different culture, right? And honestly, I hated London when I first got there.
Okay.
It was very inconvenient. Like it was always mind-boggling to me that like the trains would just have delays because there's leaves on the track or some ridiculous excuse. But eventually, I just started appreciating the fact that like they have trains and you can actually take that to the airport and do things, and then also I just started appreciating how like much of a melting pot London is and how close it is to a lot of other places that I hadn't been to or explored, and it ended up being a great experience. And working, in banking provided me a lot of experience and perspective that I didn't get before working in like management consulting, right? But a lot of it is similar, busy work, right? Like, I mean, as literally the lowest rung in an organization who's there part-time during the week, you end up doing the least glamorous work, but you still do get tidbits of stuff, and you still learn, and you get exposed to ideas and things that are happening, in this like bustling kind of environment. I also happen to have the dubious experience of being there during when the bank just kind of just disappeared. So that was, I mean, it's an interesting experience, right? It's you kind of, I mean, as an intern, you're like, oh, I'm gonna get a full-time offer or whatever, but not if the bank doesn't exist anymore.
So, I mean, that's interesting. So were you there when Lehman actually went down? And
so actually, it was the day after my graduation ceremony.
Yes.
And so that's when I became eligible to be able to work full-time, and the bank didn't exist anymore.
And what did you sort of saw it on the news, and then did you get an email saying, sorry, you're not
No,
there?
so I mean, essentially, I got an email saying, hey, nothing's going to happen. Yeah, sorry.
All of the grunt work, but unfortunately there's no payoff at the end.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, but that's life. I mean, sometimes, you get experiences and it's fine. I mean, at the time it was kind of annoying.
I mean, it's a good lesson to learn early in life almost.
Yeah, I mean, sort of. I mean, I wish I hadn't learned it, but yeah, it's a good lesson to learn. And I also wish that it wasn't the first bank to collapse, because it became very hard to get a job after that.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's why I went to Booz Allen, because the only people hiring at the bottom of like a financial crisis and economic downturn are consulting firms that service like government agencies and in government consulting effectively. And so, I mean, I was lucky to find a position there, and I did some interesting stuff. And when I had the opportunity to leave, I did. And but it was very touch and go for a bit, especially just having a mindset on doing one thing and then having to do a different thing. But overall, it was it was a humbling experience, an interesting experience, and something I learned from, which was good.
Oh, awesome. And then, I mean, you did Booz Allen, and then next thing in your career was actually interesting. You went and you became a head of product at Blue Duck, which I found really interesting, because I think especially as a founder, having worked in product is probably very valuable. You sort of understand that, you understand the engineering side a little bit. You've spoken to those guys. What were sort of the main lessons you learned or things that you took away from being head of product?
Yeah, so I mean, we were a scooter company. We were building like a scooter company in Texas in kind of a non-traditional market. And it was very difficult to kind of just find people that had experience with certain elements of, iOS apps or building kind of a web architecture to support telemetry of all these scooters and things like that. But at the same time, it was interesting because at the time I lived in San Antonio, Texas, and there's a Toyota manufacturing plant there. And we were able to get a lot of engineers that were working in the automotive space to kind of retrofit these scooters with like custom circuitry so that we had better kind of telemetry, better access controls to the scooters than even some of our larger competitors. And it was very interesting to be able to see, the whole sausage get made and control a lot of the software, but also a lot of the hardware. Spent a lot of time in China finding places where we could buy scooters. So it was very much a hands-on job. And I learned a lot about, how do you kind of manage a product org? But at the same time, I don't think that it spoke much to my skills at all, because scooters is in many ways like the perfect product market fit, because you put it out on the street with a sign that says, scan here, $1 to start. And people will just walk up to it and they'll scan there and they'll pay you $1 to start. And you don't have to educate them on what it's for. You don't have to explain to them what it is. As long as your app works and the scooter works, it does its thing, which was kind of mind-boggling, because it really took all the hard work of what product typically is out of it, because the entire form factor was perfect. The entire ability to access it on your phone was perfect. And we were really able to just take advantage of that. And we had a slightly different strategy, which was, and I was part of kind of developing that strategy as well, which was, instead of going after major urban centers, we were like, well, a lot of this is about having fun. And so we went after leisure centers. Okay. And so we went after like vacation cities, vacation destinations, and, you know, the average ride in a vacation destination is 10 times longer than it is in like a city. Like, I mean, you're commuting from here to somewhere else, and that's going to take maybe 5 minutes. But if you're just having a stroll, or you want to have fun going up and down the beach, you're going to do that for an hour. Right? And so it just was a different strategy to do, take a similar product and put it in a different environment. And, you know, it was a very great learning experience, but at the same time, it's also very hard, because, you know, we just had less resources than companies that were raising billions of dollars. And we had a smaller team than other folks, but, you know, we made a good go of it, and, you know, it was successful for a time. And then, you know, the scooter craze, I think slowly, the wave kind of ebbed back out. And yeah, so it was a cool experience.
I think especially the sort of when you have to be innovative, because I'd never thought about that those are much longer rides. So for you guys, it make lots more sense. And it's probably a little bit less work than, you know, in an urban center where it's very dispersed, very short rides, etc. So thinking differently about that, I mean, that's a very cool one. You sort of mentioned that the product experience for a scooter is very easy. You look at it, you know what it is, you understand it, it's easy to use. I think in crypto, your product experience often is not that easy. What do you think are some of the challenges in the crypto industry at the moment with that experience side?
I think a lot of it is driven by the technology, right? Like, I think the technology was made by a lot of people, has been developed by a lot of people that are contributing to it, that are they're purist, right? They're purist in terms of like what the blockchain should do, and everybody wants everything to happen on the blockchain so that everything can be automated and everything can be decentralized. And that makes sense, right? If you're developing the infrastructure for something. Now, the challenge with that is, as soon as you start building tools using that for real world use cases, it becomes a lot more complicated, because now, at the very least, the user is not on the blockchain, right? And so how is the user going to interface with it? So now that experience becomes pretty, like, it has a great deal of friction, right? There's like browser extensions, and there's like some mobile apps, but mobile apps can't connect to other mobile apps. So there's a big mess in terms of how the user journey like works, because the user, again, is not on the blockchain. So the blockchain infrastructure can be as great as it can be, but the single point of failure now is the non-blockchain piece, which was the meat space piece, right? And so similarly, like, as more and more cases emerge of real world use cases, which I think is what everybody's goal is, right? So that we can move towards a more decentralized web where there's more user ownership and less kind of intermediation, then we need to really start focusing on the next phase of this, which is, how do we make the user experience easier, right? And if you think about the early days of the internet, it was very similar, right? Like, you used to have to dial in to like a bulletin board server, and then eventually you got a CD-ROM in the mail, and you could then go into Amazon, or that's AOL, or some other web service. And then slowly we started having internet connections that were always on, so that like when your mom picks up the phone, you don't get, you don't get disconnected from whatever you're doing. And it was an iteration of like a bad user experience slowly to a better user experience, because people realized, oh, there's real utility. There's actual things I can use it for. There's people that want to use it for this. There's a way for me to make money if people use it for this. There's a way for me to make more money if I make it easier for them to use it for this. And then slowly people are like, well, why don't we improve the protocols to allow me to make more money by making it easier for more people to use the thing? And then slowly we get to the internet of today, right? So I think that a similar evolution is going to happen. It's going to have to happen because I think that there's true utility that people have built. There's true use cases that can be built. And there's a lot of really interesting things that we haven't really even imagined yet because the adoption is not quite there yet, right? And so just like a lot of different use cases slowly emerged with the internet, first it was all about, oh, well, this is all chat based. Okay, so now we did chat. And then we did, oh, you can, buy pet food on the internet at pets.com, whatever it is. And then we did that. And then we were like, oh, well, nobody's going to buy anything on the internet. It was a bad experience. And so slowly we got to the e-commerce phase where people were like, well, no, people are going to buy stuff on the internet again. And it just took cycles. It took time. It took, development, took more people to build things, took a lot of intermediation to take away the hard stuff and put it behind the curtain. And I think the same thing is probably going to happen in the blockchain space.
No, it's interesting because, you also remember the old days of the internet. Having the dial-up, all those kinds of things. And I think even today, doing a seed phrase, all those things, I always say, I don't know if my mom would use that. But eventually you'll have apps where you don't even know it's running on a blockchain. You've got all the benefits without the hard part. But a lot of us, I think, forget how long the internet took to get to where we are now.
Yeah.
Crypto is iterating much faster, actually,
of course,
compared to the internet.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's a lot of things. Lots of people have said this. It's not a unique idea, but a lot of what we call things makes it scarier, right? Like calling it a wallet makes it scary.
Yep.
Calling it a seed phrase and then making it say, oh, I promise that I've written it down. And if I lose it, I know that I'll lose all my money or all the stuff that's in here. Like, that's scary, right? A lot of this is driven by a lack of regulation, right? And regulatory clarity would solve some of these things because then people wouldn't be as scared to say, well, we can store the last two words and now we're not a custodian or something, right? So a lot of this stuff will slowly get resolved. But I think that the biggest problem we have right now is people don't understand what is being built, right? A lot of people are like, well, it's only for tokens. Well, no, it's good for other things. Other people are like, well, it's only for NFTs. Or it's only for speculation on DeFi assets, or it's all about real world asset tokenization. The reality is it's about all those things. Just like the internet is about all the things, right? The internet is about me getting a recipe for what I'm going to eat for dinner. It's also about me buying clothing. It's also about me, signing a document to lease a car, by DocuSign or something. So it's about everything. And we just need to get to that phase where people are like, oh, there's actually lots of different ways that you can use this, and it's actually meaningfully, it doesn't have to be better, but it's meaningfully different from a different way of doing it. And it still works, right? I think it's simple as that.
Yeah. I think it just adds things that we don't have now. You add transparency, you take away centralization, those kinds of things. So it's the same thing, but in a more trusted, more secure, smoother way. I want to take it back a little bit now. All of the things you just talked about, you need startups to get those things going. I know after that, you went to On Deck. What did you do at On Deck? What do they do? And sort of, because that's when you started looking at the startup side of life.
Yeah, no, so I decided that I wanted to start a company. And I found this group called On Deck, and they were doing founder fellowships. It was, putting, 100 people in kind of a city together and just organizing events around it. So you could meet other people that were in the same mental headspace of, hey, I also want to start a company. I'm looking for a co-founder and I want to meet somebody to build a company with. And so I participated in the program. I met a lot of really interesting people, and I realized, hey, maybe I should give it a shot, right? Like, I should just try it. And so while I was trying to find a co-founder, I just started building a business called Debbie, which was in the commercial real estate data space. And I just started just doing the work. And eventually, as you start doing the work, like, things start just going your way a little bit. And so I ended up building that, and we had customers and it was growing. And then the pandemic happened, and I don't know if you know, but commercial real estate didn't do so well during the pandemic. And so I ended up sort of winding that down. And I was just in the Slack group because they had a massive Slack. During the pandemic, they kind of pivoted to an online community. And I was thinking, oh, do I really want to try again something, or like maybe I should just quit and get a job or something. And I was validating some ideas, and I was texting around in the community, and I met my co-founder, Charles, who became my co-founder for Rian.
Mm-hmm.
And we just sort of got along on wanting to build sort of very small use cases, or just like a mini product or like a micro SaaS business. And we started working together on building essentially like an investor fundraising tool, like for founders. So like a document generator, safe notes, where you can just kind of configure the cap and the discount, whatever. And then we would just generate it for you, and we would just email it to your investor so that they could sign it. And then naturally people are like, well, can we just also have them, we also built it so that you could actually just get the bank instructions and do the payment transfer. And our goal was to just build something small just for fun and charge people just, per use, and not really turn it into a business, but just provide a utility that obviously people need and want to use. And maybe they don't want to pay DocuSign $5,000 for just the one fundraise. Yep. So we built that, and then through that we actually started. That's how we ended up kind of going down the rabbit hole of crypto and digital assets and stable coins and getting to Rian, because we added support for USDC and wallet transfers, because a lot of folks were reaching out. They're like, well, there's no way for me to do a safe note and then also fund it in USDC. Can you support that? And we were both, separately but together at the same time, going down into like, what the latest, market upturn, right? Which was NFTs and tokens and DAOs and all this stuff. And we were just exploring it on our own and seeing kind of what was going on in the community. And when we had the opportunity, people were asking for it. We were like, I guess it doesn't exist. We should just build it. So we built wallet-to-wallet transfers on both Ethereum and Solana. And so you could actually fund a safe note after you signed it directly in tokens directly to the multi-sig or the wallet for the startup. And then a couple of months later, people started reaching out and they're like, oh, you guys are the people that have figured out how to do that. How do we buy a laptop? Like, we have all this money now. How do we, I got to go to Denver. How do I pay for airplane tickets?
Yep.
And it didn't compute really for the first couple of times people asked us. And then we started digging into it a little bit, and we were like, why do all these people have this problem? And it turned out that everybody had really been focusing on consumer on-ramps and consumer flows into this decentralized space. But nobody realized that, everybody in this space who's building stuff is building a business, and they want to make money. And they want to provide services for money. And nobody was focusing on now these companies are earning revenue. What do they do with it, right? And everybody's being forced to go back off a consumer off-ramp. So everybody was off-ramping through their exchange account personally. And then naturally, they were worried about, I just off-ramped, $100,000 to pay AWS for my employer. Do I have to pay taxes on it? Right? Because to Coinbase or to Kraken or to Gemini, to any of these exchanges, they don't know that this is reimbursement for your job. They just see it as you put in 10K here, and then it went into a wallet, and then $100,000 came back in. So maybe you made 100,000, 90K profit, I guess, right? So there's no way to know, and so people were just getting stuck and being very anxious about just operating a regular business. And we realized that there was just a missing link to provide just a B2B grade solution to solve some of these problems for people.
No, it's a very real problem. I deal with it every day with my clients. Is you've got a bunch of USDC, but having your AWS run all those kinds of things, at the moment, you need a good solution for that. You've got decentralized solutions, but they're still being figured out. We're not quite there yet. You guys then went and built the solution, or started working on that solution. You started doing the credit card process, etc. How was that? I'm assuming that wasn't quick, easy, or simple. So,
yeah, it was not easy. It was actually relatively quick.
Okay.
Mostly because we had some ideas on how to do it, and we explored ways to kind of do it quickly and easily. But what we realized were that the easiest way to do it was to kind of build a debit card structure where once you kind of move funds, it'll off ramp them and put them in a titled account in your name, and it'll be very much like, you know, fiat. It would be pretend crypto banking, right? So you're off ramping, and then your company is now titled on the bank account, and then we give you a debit card through a banking as a service partner or whatever. But then the challenge with that is that in the US at least, and a lot of places, regulation, again, is not settled. There's a lot of guidelines, right? So regulators have shared a lot of guidelines on what they think is happening and what they think should be applying to things, but they haven't made it apply, right? And they haven't forced people, I mean, they haven't changed the rules, right? So they just say, hey, you know, it'd be great if you woke up at 7 a.m. every day, but they're not like, oh, if you don't wake up at 7 a.m., it's bad, right? So they're just kind of creating this weird space where there are rules, and it seems like there might be outcomes, negative outcomes if you break the rules, but there's also no formal enforcement system, or there's no informal laws, or no formal laws. And so we realized, well, this whole way of doing it is actually probably not compatible with where regulations and guidelines are going. And so what we did was we took a step back and we said, well, let's figure out a different pathway. And that's where we figured out that, well, if we build Rian as a credit card company rather than as a debit card company, it becomes a little bit easier to handle changes in, you know, regulatory interface and changes in rules and changes in kind of guidelines. Because what we are at the end of the day is we're an asset-backed lender. We lend money to you based on, secured by the value of your assets. Like your assets could be a painting, it could be a car, it could be your house, right? But it's just an asset, and we are taking on the credit risk of the asset effectively. So that's essentially how we started, and it's been, you know, going well, and we were able to kind of get partners to work with us because we were mitigating a lot of the, you know, regulatory risk by structuring our business in a way where it was respectful of the fact that this was uncharted territory, and responding to the fact that, you know, this space is going to change and evolve over the next year or 2 or 3 years, and we wanted to build a solution that, you know, provided businesses with the ability to operate like a real business and pay for very like normal things like Google, Amazon, you know, DigitalOcean, Notion, you know, all the things that people need to pay for, airplane tickets, hotels, all the stuff that people, you know, running regular businesses need. So that's how we ended up building the solution.
Okay. I mean, it's really interesting because, I mean, you found the product market fit, the regulations were there, you needed to navigate all of that. I saw that you guys also went through the Alliance DAO accelerator.
Yeah.
Because that's almost the getting things going, etc.
Yeah.
So for startups, for companies in the industry, crypto companies, would you recommend going through an accelerator? And what is that experience like? How do they help out?
Yeah, no, for sure. Look, I think that every team's journey is different, right? I think there's a lot of teams that would benefit from going through an accelerator, or they would benefit from working as part of a larger community, right? I think accelerators provide two things, really. One is obviously capital. And so if you need capital and you're having trouble finding capital, I think accelerators are a good way to sort of meet that need. But I think more importantly, the reason we chose to go through Alliance is because they also provide you a community of other founders and other builders, and it's very much a living organism, right? So every year or every couple months, there's a new cohort, and there's new people that are looking for the same solution. So for us, it was a bit selfish, right? We wanted to go through it because we wanted to meet a lot of the other builders, and also the team at Alliance is fantastic, right? So they're super helpful in figuring out, you know, how do we architect on-chain infrastructure? How do we talk to sort of crypto industry participants and market makers and stuff like that? And they have an amazing network. They're very, very hands-on. Everybody there is very open and collaborative. And we had a great experience. We thought that it was completely worth it. We have gotten way more out of it. Even we still continue to get a lot more out of it every day. And it was definitely worth it for us. But at the same time, you know, it's not for everyone.
No, that's brilliant to hear, because that's sort of what I was wondering about, is figuring out, you know, how everything works, how it all fits together. Because I'm sure that custody was one of your big challenges. figuring out how to custody this, how to actually run everything.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit of an insight how you guys solved for that problem?
Yeah, so I mean, we're not a custodian, and what we did was we built infrastructure that essentially allows you to custody assets, and that are titled to you effectively on chain. Your wallet controls them, your wallet owns them, but we have certain liquidation rights based on the amount of spending that you've done. So that's essentially how it works. It's very similar to kind of how a DeFi protocol works, right? So you stake in Aave or Compound, and you can borrow on the other end. And there's some sort of logic there that says if this goes below here to there, a third party can come in and liquidate you, right? So it's very similar architecture to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then working with the Visas of the world, how hard was it to get them comfortable with how this works?
Yeah, honestly, I think that if you've been following the space at all, the credit card companies are actually very interested in the evolving space of blockchains, especially stablecoins, right? And so what we found was we found the willing partners and interested parties at both, at Visa and MasterCard, and they're very curious. I mean, obviously, it's a space which is evolving, right? And so they're very much limited to what they're able to do by the banks that they work with and things like that. But overall, the networks are very forward thinking, and they want to explore opportunities and figure things out. I think that there is obviously inherent risk when you're dealing with banks as a core intermediary, and banks are going to respond to regulatory pressure, but also they're going to respond to risk metrics, right? So as things evolve, it's one of the risks that we're running, right? Which is, we have good relationships ultimately, and we run a business which is, in our opinion, as far as we can get in terms of this particular industry, fairly low risk. So that's just the nature of where we have to be, right? But overall, I mean, both networks, Visa, MasterCard, everybody's really interested in seeing where this goes.
Well, that's really good to hear, because you guys are making it practical for me almost. Is what you've created is all of the crypto stuff that everyone's doing. I can go and I can buy something, pay for my AWS, all those things. So. Yeah. I think that's what we were talking about earlier, is this is where it becomes really practical, the real use cases.
Yeah, for us, right, it's a bit selfish. What we're building is really part of it's our part of our vision of where we see everything going, right? In a weird way, my opinion on where things are going is backwards, right? So if you look at cash, I can give you $10 or pounds, whatever it is, and you can later today you can use that same money and pay someone else, and then they can use that money and pay someone else, and then they can use that and pay someone else, or go home, or whatever it is, and it's the same $10 that created $50 of value. We moved to this electronic money space where payments can be in real time, but settlement is next week, right? So now every dollar that's spent is actually $5 maybe, or $10, right? So because you need a new dollar for every additional transfer. So I send you $1, that's $1. You send someone else $1, that's $1. So now there's $2 involved in this $1 transaction. So we think that what's happening with digital money is we're going back to non-fungible money, which is a digital version of cash, which is I can send it to you and it's left me, it's now with you. So payment and settlement is happening at the same time. And now you can actually do a lot of really interesting use cases, because now we're not relying on third-party liquidity providers to facilitate a transfer.
That's interesting, because you almost take risk out of the system there, because it's settled immediately.
Yeah, there's no counterparty.
So there's no counterparty risk. So it's actually a more mature system.
Yeah, and you need less money to run it, so working capital needs go down. It costs less because there's less money required to do the same volume of transactions. So now the overall risk-free cost of that goes down. So it just becomes a very, now this is very deep, kind of just getting to the point of being a deep economics conversation, but overall, digital instant settlement money is very much the future, right? And our view is that as that becomes the future, some people will want to operate like they do with a bank account, right? Like they do with, traditional, mobile wallet apps, etc. But with this new paradigm, new type of money that is sitting inside their own wallet, which they self-custody, or they might work with an institutional custodian, they might continue working with a bank. But everybody is going to be incentivized to move more people onto these rails because they cost less to run.
No, they cost less to run, quicker settlement, less risk. I mean, the benefits are obvious. So
Yes, and our view is that if we build the connective tissue around it, we'll be around forever.
So, I mean, I just said the benefits are obvious. Regulations, and it looks like regulators, I don't know, I think they see the benefits, but they potentially don't understand how to get there yet.
Yeah.
What do you think is the challenge with regulation at the moment, especially at that intersection where you're dealing with it?
Look, I think a lot of it, I mean, some of it we've already seen, right? Like, same thing happened with the internet. Like, if you go around the world, there's some countries where you can, there's some countries where you could just walk in a store and you can buy a cable modem or a router and you're good. Like, you just go to pay for it, you go home, you plug it in, and you're good. And then there's other countries where in order to buy a router, you have to give them your ID, they have to photocopy it, they have to load it to the government, they have to tag it to your particular identity. And those countries typically are autocratic regimes, right? And the countries that allow you to go buy it at the store and plug it in usually are democratic free societies. The problem we're having is that we're just in this phase, like this political space and this kind of world phase where for some reason everybody's feeling very pessimistic. And for whatever reason, a lot of otherwise sane democratic people are like, hey, what if we built everything into an authoritarian regime and nobody's got anything to hide? And that's okay, but it goes against kind of basic fundamental freedoms of liberty and justice and being innocent under the law. So ultimately, I think this gets sorted out. I'm pretty optimistic about the nature of liberal democracy, right? And so I think that this gets sorted out. But at the same time, we're going to have to deal with it, and some places will go down the more control path, and other places will go down a more reasonable pathway. I think what we need to get to on the other side is helping them understand that, look, there's real use cases here, and this is actually good for the economy, right? Like, one of my theories, and I don't share this sort of often, is that as we've gone to more electronic money, the only lever that most democratic society or most societies have now in terms of moving an economy up or down is interest rates, because we've lost track of the second ingredient in kind of GDP, which is money supply and money velocity. So it's just interest rates now. So we just have a single lever. But as we can go back to non-fungible money, reducing the cost of a single transaction, increasing the ability for the same amount of money to impact more people, create more transaction volume, we get to a point where now central banks will have more levers to manage, a market, and they'll have more tools available rather than less tools available. And I think that as the economic conversations progress to that point, we'll start seeing government and elected representatives taking a different approach, because I think that they'll realize that this is not a technology versus regulation argument. This is a prosperity versus decline argument.
Yeah. That's a very interesting one, because you almost start bringing the social and technology into it, and it's really, really the big picture there, where this solves for some of the issues. Because it's interesting to see certain countries go almost more socialistic in their design, but we've seen other countries where it's very much free markets that fuels innovation, and there's much more growth there.
And there's risk, right? With a free market, people are free to boom and they're free to go bust. With a managed market, people are not free to boom, but they're also not free to go bust. So it's not necessarily bad, right? It's not necessarily good. It's just different, and there's definitely going to be different outcomes, right? When you have a free market and you don't proactively legislate before regulators start understanding what is actually happening, what happens is that, there's going to be bad actors that figured it out first, and they're going to take advantage of it, and they're going to cause a market collapse, or they're going to cause somebody to lose money. And that's not good. But at the same time, that's how our financial system got built, right? In the 1920s, people did the same thing. And then they were like, hey, we should add some rules around this. Okay. And then they added some rules, and sometimes they worked and other times they didn't. And then they added some more rules, and then they added more rules. And then eventually we got to a point where we're feeling pretty good about it, right? But we also know that it's not working for everybody, which is why a lot of people, especially young people, are interested in blockchain technology, DeFi, a lot of different things, because the system that we built may have gotten too restrictive. So maybe it's time to right size it and have sensible conversations about it and figure out where we go from here. But I don't think it's killing, every form of innovation that's emerging immediately is going to get anybody anywhere, really.
No, it's interesting because someone said it a while ago. The SEC wasn't created because everyone was behaving themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, the traditional market there were a lot of issues, people doing, the things that crypto is well known for at the moment. But also, if you look at the speed of innovation, if you start with the East India Trading Company, first version of company, to where we are now. They
also did a lot of bad stuff.
Yeah, there was a lot going on, and I think people forget that. But we've iterated very quickly. If you think about when Bitcoin came out and where we are already now, I think that's actually really exciting. I mean, we've spoken about the future a little bit from a Rian side of things. What are you guys planning? What's coming in the future? Where do you see things going?
Yeah, I'm not able to share a lot, but we're doing a lot of really interesting things behind the scenes. Again, right, there's very much two pieces of Rian. One piece is obviously what our clients see, which is a B2B card product that lets them operate like a regular business and pay for the things that they need without compromising on the quality or the tooling or anything like that. And then a big piece of this is really focused on propagating and building and developing the infrastructure and moving real money on it, right? I mean, a big piece of what we're doing is how do we enable different use cases that we know are possible, but especially in if you look at the RWA movement or all these other things, we have a digitally native customer base. We have some digital native payments cases for them, and we have some TradFi cases for them. So we're really focusing on building a lot of the infrastructure that will enable the future interoperability of TradFi, DeFi, and blockchain spaces together. And we're focusing a lot on the technical side of things and how do we build all the tooling today so that, let's say tomorrow, or, if you're listening and you're in, other places in the world that we don't operate and you want to issue a card product and you don't know how to build smart contracts that can interface with the two, come talk to us. We're happy to work with you, make that available for you. So for us, it's really about building the infrastructure and enabling others to build cool use cases. And, if they want to build consumer products, great. It's just, a lot of it is the technology needs to exist. And going back to kind of one of the questions you asked at the beginning, one of the things I learned early on in large companies don't want to buy tools that no one has used, right? And so for us, a big piece of it was, how do we build the tools? And then how do we move millions of dollars on the tools so that if we get into a conversation with a large bank or somebody like that down the line, once there's more regulatory clarity, they can buy or license something that already works, that's been battle tested, it's been stress tested, it's had real volume on it, right? So for us, that's where we think a lot of the future of Rian is going to be, because one of the examples I give is the printing press was invented a long time ago, and today there's over 140 countries that still don't print their own money.
That's interesting. Is it that they're using separate?
Yeah, they have other people print their money in more developed countries because they don't have the technology to print on a piece of paper. So our bet is that some places will figure out how to do what we do, and some places will do it better than us. A lot of places will not figure out how to do it, and they'll need us.
I think that's the other thing, is the market is so big. There's more than enough pieces of the pie. We just need to make sure the pie is sort of grown responsibly and that it all works out.
Yeah, absolutely. And also it's about being collaborative, right? It's we don't aspire to control the entire market. We don't want to do that. That's against the ethos of this whole space. We want to develop the technology, allow other people to build better, cooler, interesting use cases, and make it available for folks.
Well, that's very exciting. So 2 final questions just to wrap things up. These are more general questions. So at the moment, looking at the world, looking at crypto, everything else, what's exciting you at the moment, and what do you find really exciting right now?
I mean, this is very much not a contrarian take anymore, but I'm very excited about stablecoins. I think that stablecoins, very much, like they found true utility and people are using them. So I went to Dev Connect in Istanbul, and I was able to get Turkish lira out of a kiosk by sending them Tether. And so, like, it's very much a thing that's happening. And I'm very bullish on it. And I think it's like super interesting. I think that we're about to have kind of an explosion in, issuers, but also use cases. And I think it's going to be very interesting over the next, like short term, I think. And there's a lot of interesting use cases, interesting type of tokens coming out. And it's going to be interesting to see a lot of the innovation happening in that space and the various use cases that emerge. I think it's ripe for the next phase of the cycle.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, international trade between different currencies with quick settlement, because current rails are not that quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
And very expensive. So, just for basic trade and business, that's an exciting one.
Yeah.
If we flip it around, what are you afraid of at the moment?
I think I've covered it already. I think what I'm afraid of is having an adversarial approach to people that are skeptical, right? I think, look, there's legitimate reasons to be skeptical, and it's okay to be skeptical. But also, people in this community, they really need to engage with folks and explain to them, hey, like, it's not okay to say, oh, you don't understand this, or you're old, or whatever. You need to demonstrate to them, hey, this number of people get this value out of what we're building. And if you can tie it back to human beings that vote or human beings that are contributing to their societies, then it becomes a lot easier to have a productive conversation about it, right? So what I'm scared of is a lot of times, in the space, again, because we don't really, it's all very much a free-for-all. So we have a lot of different personalities that have their own way of speaking truth to power, I suppose. And it's important for them to try to make it productive, because otherwise we're just going to end up further back, and it's going to be harder to move forward, because it's harder when people close the door for them to reopen it. So that's the thing I'm worrying about. And I think that, and obviously I'm worried about bad actors hijacking the space again. I'm worried about all these other things, but all of them kind of emerged. They converge to the same thing, which is letting bad actors hijack our space and the narrative around it. That's something that is still scary and possible. And so it's good to keep that in mind.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's scary, the divide, as there's a divide between regulators, crypto, whatever, traditional finance and crypto, and that shouldn't be there. We should have people working on that. So I think that's a very good point. We'll wrap it up there so the conversation isn't too long. This has been a lot of fun. If people want to learn more about you, want to learn more about Rian, what's the best place to sort of get a hold of you guys?
Yeah, please check us out at raincards.com. And if you want to reach me, my Twitter DMs are open. It's at Rookster. So happy to chat to folks about whatever.
Awesome. We'll put all of that in the notes. Farooq, thank you very much for the conversation.
Yeah, thanks
really enjoyed
again. Yeah, great to be here.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Decentralized podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I would really appreciate it if you could like and share this. If you got any value from it or find anything interesting, please just also follow us on YouTube or wherever you're listening to your podcasts. If you want to connect with me, you can just follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter. The links are down in the description. And I'd also like to thank our partner for this episode, Lemma. Lemma assists DAOs and foundation governance companies to do their governance, operations, and all the admin tasks. If you really want to focus on building your community and building the project that you're working on, Lemma can take care of all the admin, all the really boring stuff, so you can focus on the important stuff. You can find a link to their page down in the description as well. I'll see you on the next episode.